Hey y'all. So today it's Chane versus Briar. Since we don't know what's gonna get banned or not banned come May 2nd, I've decided I'm gonna, try, like, get some practice in with some other heroes which I think will be strong. I think people are sleeping on Chane right now. A lot of people think that if Starvo will get touched, then, Visrai becomes unstoppable, and I think that's not true. I think Starvo is shutting Chane out, and Chane will, and I believe Chane is favored into Visrai and also favored into Prism. So I actually think Chane would be a pretty strong pick if Starvo gets touched. Also, it seems likely that Visrai will also get touched, so I do want to get some practice in on Chane. So I won the die roll here, and I decided to go second, because I actually think in the Runeblade Mirror, you do want tempo more than you want to set up. Especially since this version of Chane no longer runs Flock of the Featherwalkers. The only meaningful setup I can do is a Rune Chant and a Soul Shackle, which feels less good than just starting the game with tempo. On my opponent's side, they started this turn with Sonata. They pitched into it, they only got one thing, and I had to take the Arcane, because my only Arcane bearer is Skullcap. And then they play a Pulse just to get the Embodiment of Lightning, and they go ahead and pitch to create a Rune Chant, and they'll Arsenal that E-Strike, which they got off of the Sonata. So honestly, a pretty strong setup turn from my opponent. They get a Rune Chant and an Embodiment of Lightning, and an Arsenal E-Strike. Cool, so I start with making a Rune Chant. Then I activate Chane. Go ahead and play Minnowism. And then Shadow Versa, which has Go again from Chane's ability, and is coming in for 5 because of Minnowism. Of course, I could have played Shadow Versa and banished the Invert Existence to give the Shadow Versa Go again. But I didn't want to banish my Invert Existence so early. I do think Invert Existence is a much nicer card to have in your banish zone later on in the game to threaten your opponent with instant speed arcane damage. And I created a Rune Chant first, so that I don't need to break the chain to create the Rune Chant and swing Rosetta. Note that neither of us are running Arcane Barrier. I mean, except for Skullcap. Because Chane and Briar typically do a lot of the damage physically. Rosetta and the Odd Rune Chant is probably the only sources of Arcane. So I value the block. Also, Briar has lots of relevant on-hits. Whereas if I was against Visrai, I would definitely be running, Cool Hand. Cool, and so my opponent just takes the full 8 damage, and this is what I mean about, wanting to go second in the Runeblade Mirror. So yeah, my opponent got a bit of setup, but it cost them 8 health to do that setup. That's one way you can look at it. Okay, my opponent starts with a Tomb of Harvests, which actually sends that E-Strike that we knew was in the arsenal to the bottom. But they get to draw 3, so now they have 5 cards, in hand. So the number of cards they have remains the same, but they are, one non-attack closer to another Embodiment of Lightning. So my opponent actually gets a really good draw. They draw into another E-Strike, which is really strong with Embodiment of Lightning, because they can just draw a card, and it has Go again from the Embodiment of Lightning, which means this was just a 0-cost 5 attack. So I take the Rune Chant, and since, we're in the early game and I haven't built up enough shackles yet, I'm definitely looking to block out in the early few turns of the game. And later on is, like, when I have higher shackles, that's when I start using my life more as a resource. So looking at this hand, I know I want to Arsenal the Tomb of Faendal. And so I decide I'm going to block with these 2 cards, and I make... I made a mistake here. This is just a byproduct of me not having played against Briar too much, because, Briar's been kind of absent from the recent meta. So my opponent plays Amulet of Earth, gets Embodiment of Lightning, since this is a second non-attack. And then they come in with a Snatch, and this is what I mean by making a mistake, blocking the E-Strike. Briars, really like to end their combat chain with, like, a relevant on-hit, like a Snatch, a CNC, a Runic Reclamation. So, you know, once I decided that I want to block with these cards, I should have saved them for the later attacks, which, you know, I know are definitely coming because my opponent had 4 cards left. So blocking the E-Strike, definitely a mistake there, and we get punished for it. Yep, so I'm forced to use some equipment here, put a Riftbind and Skullcap in front of it, blocks the 4. And then my opponent comes in with Runic Reclamation, which is, you know, another punish. So really, if I hadn't wasted my 5 block on the E-Strike, I could have blocked his Runic Reclamation by putting that 5 block in front of this plus a Grasp. But because of my blunder there, we get punished. There's no way I block this unless I use my Husk, which I'm not going to do when I'm at 38. So, yep, I take the Husk, I lose a Shackle, and my opponent gets a Runechant. Okay, so on our turn, we're just going to Shackle up. I play the Marvin Skies just to make space in my arsenal for this Tomb of Fendel. So the nice thing about Tomb of Fendel in the aggro mirror is that I can block with an attack on my opponent's turn, and on their turn activate my Spellbound Creepers to play the Tomb of Fendel from arsenal, and draw up and gain some health. So opponent starts with a Gloomveil, I take the Runechant. Of course, they haven't created an aura this turn, so we can totally expect some shenanigans, and they press it. So the Gloomveil hits, creating an embodiment of Earth off of Briar, which means the Gloomveil gets go again from its own effect, because it's continuously checking. Okay, and then my opponent follows up with a CNC. And yeah, so since I've already blocked with an attack this turn, I can instant speed out my Tomb of Fendel, but I didn't. Honestly, I just sort of had another brain fart seeing the CNC. I was like, oh no, it's attacking my Tomb of Fendel and I need to protect it, and I forgot that I can actually just play it. So yeah, I go ahead and full block the CNC, and you know, this is why we do this replay analysis, is to catch up mistakes like this. Okay, so now turn we get a Banish, and we actually hit, which is unfortunate. I really didn't want to hit that, because that's just an unnecessary blood debt I'm going to take, since I have no more cards left. Go ahead and activate Chane, continue building up the Shackles, and I just pass it over. Okay, opponent starts with a Force of Nature, and they fuse it with a Weave Earth. And then they play the Weave Earth, getting an embodiment of Lightning. And then they play a Yellow Lightning Surge from hand. This is coming in for 4. It's only buffed by Force of Nature. Weave Earth does not buff this. But my opponent does have an Amulet of Earth on the field, so they could at instant speed give it +1, which means they would get the draw effect from Force of Nature. So I do need to block 5, because if I only block 4, you know, they could do the instant speed thing and draw their card. Yep, so here we go, we block 5. And again, I choose to block with one of my attacks, so I can do my instant speed creepers thing. And they make a Runechant and swing Rosetta. This is coming in for 5. They do break the chain, so I can block a Grasp again, but there's really no point. There's no on-hit here. So I go ahead and take the 5. And then, before my opponent goes to the end step, I activate my Creepers. And here's where... So I had the option of blocking with a blue Bounding Demigod on my red Ghostly Visit to do this Creepers play. And I chose to block with a blue instead of the red, and I actually think that's a mistake. I should have blocked with a red, because the two worst cases are, like, if I block with a red, and I draw into 2 blues, then I'm left with 3 blues in hand. The other worst case is I block with my blue, like in this case, and I draw into 2 reds, and I'm left with 3 reds in hand. And I think the being left with 3 reds in hand is way worse than being left with 3 blues in hand when you're playing Chane. So I should have blocked my Ghostly Visit rather than a Bounding Demigod. And now, again, like still on my opponent's, like before my opponent goes to the end step, I'm deciding whether I want to, you know, use my resources efficiently and use my 1 floating to play this Invert Existence. But I do need to take into account that I need to deal my opponent arcane damage on my turn, so I don't lose my creepers. Now, if I had a way to swing Rosetta, then I could definitely just Invert Existence at the end of my opponent's turn here, and go ahead and swing Rosetta on my turn to get the arcane damage I need. But since I did the, you know, I blocked with my blue and now I have no blues, there's actually no way I can swing Rosetta, or there's no, you know, efficient way where I can swing Rosetta. So I elect to just pass here and do the Invert Existence on my turn. Okay, and we get 1 hit from our banish. Not something, you know, we're going to be able to play this turn with no blues. But having some cards in banish is nice. Right, so I start with a Chain Shackle, which lets me play my Ghostly Visit with Go again. And my opponent takes the 4, which is quite expected. And I go ahead and pitch his Mormon Skies. I swing Rosetta. This is only coming in for 2 physical. There's no arcane attached to this because I've not played a non-attack this turn. But I'm leaving 1 floating to invert existence, so that I deal arcane to my opponent to keep my creepers and I get to arsenal the Howl from Beyond. Of course, I could have, you know, played Morbid Skies and then pitch Riftbind to Ghostly Visit and then pitch Howl from Beyond to Rosetta for the arcane. But then I end the turn with no arsenal. And I really do like arsenaling a non-attack on Chane, because then you can, you know, creepers it out and get an action point. So, yep, go ahead and do the invert existence. My opponent takes the 2 arcane. It really doesn't matter what I banish here, since the Pulsive Candlehole has already been used. So really I can just pick any non-attack and any attack over here. I'll take a Blood Dead and go ahead and arsenal this Howl from Beyond. Okay, my opponent plays a Bramble Spark, fusing with a Channel Mount Heroic. And then they play the Scar for a Scar. This is coming in for 1 arcane and 7 physical. So I take the arcane and then the 7 physical coming in here. And my consideration here for how I decide to block is basically, if I take all this, can my opponent Snapdragons and Rosetta me such that they force a card from my hand, because I'll need to block the arcane to avoid going down to 13. So if this Scar for Scar hits me, I'll go down to 16. They can Snapdragons it, and they can pitch a Chalmont Heroic to Rosetta. Then the arcane puts me to 14, and I can block the 2 physical with Grasp and Skullcap. So I won't go down to 13. So I feel good about this, but actually my opponent has an Amulet of Earth on the field, and they have fused Earth this turn. So they could at instant speed make the Scar for a Scar come in for 1 more, in which case when the Rosetta comes in, I'll need to pitch a blue to stop the arcane. At the same time, I still feel like I'm okay if they do that, because then they would have used their Snapdragons, used the Amulet of Earth, and most importantly, pitched their Channel Mount Heroic, which is their strongest card in the deck. So with all that considering, I'm okay trading all that for 1 blue from my hand this turn. So I decided to just go ahead and take the 7, and I don't need to worry about my Husk being threatened. And yep, so my opponent goes ahead and arsenals that Channel Mount Heroic. And we go to our turn with a full grip and an Art of War in hand. So we go ahead and hit 1 Bounding Demigod. So we have 2 attacks in a Banish Zone, 3 Blood Dead cards in hand, and an Art of War. So it's looking very likely that I'm going to use this Art of War here to get Go again instead of +1. Yep, so I start with a Shackle. This means that when I use my Art of War, that I can, you know, Art of War at instant speed to give my next attack Go again without breaking the chain. Whereas if I start with Art of War, picking Go again, and then later activate Chain, I would end up breaking the combat chain, which isn't too big of a deal in a matchup like this. It's really a lot more relevant when against Oldhim with a Rampart, but it's still one of those habits which I think is just a good thing to, you know, get into if you're trying to learn Chain. Is how can you sequence your turns to break the combat chain as little as possible. So yeah, activated Chain, so the Unhallowed Rites had Go again, and then I Art of War, and giving my next attack Go again, and banishing and drawing 2. So we drew into a blue here, which is very nice, because I do want to play this Howl from Beyond in my arsenal. Because without doing that, I actually can't play any of these attacks in my Banish Zone. They all require me to have played a non-attack this turn. Also, I go ahead and use Creepers. I Creepers out this Howl from Beyond, so I get an extra action point. And this is the great thing about having a non-attack with Go again in your arsenal when you're playing Chain. Because as you get to higher Shackle values, you're really limited by action points. So you want to be using Creepers to give you the extra action point. Yep, and I go ahead and do this Bounding Demigod. This is coming for 7, and this has go again from the Out of War, so actually still do have 2 action points. Opponent showing us that they had a pretty bad hand this turn. Chalmont Heroic plus 2 Rebels. Those Rebels are blocking 3 because of the embodiment. And I go ahead and play my other Bounding Demigod. This is just coming in for 2. And then I get to use my last floating to Rosetta for 2 Arcane and 2 Physical. This 2 Arcane ensures that I get to keep my Creepers. Yep, opponent takes a 2 Arcane and gives me the last card in hand as well. So honestly, since this was an Out of War turn, my opponent was probably incentivized to block out anyway. But yeah, this does mean we've got tempo firmly on our side right now. Took a Blood Debt at the end of my turn because of the Unhallowed Rites. This has been in my banner zone since forever. Yeah, my opponent's turn, they just draw up. And we know they still have the Chalmont Heroic in their arsenal. So we do need to try and make sure we pressure as much as we can. Although with a full grip plus on being on Shackle 4, that shouldn't be too difficult. We go and get 2 hits. We do hit our other Out of War, so that's not something I'm happy to see. But hey, that happens. And we do get 2 hits, so can't complain too much there. So once again, with all these attacks in my banner zone, what I'm limited by is action points, which means I'm definitely looking to Creepers again this turn. And so if I want to keep the Creepers around, I need to deal 3 Arcane to my opponent, which means I do need to create a Rune Chant. So I like to do that at the start of my turn, so I don't need to break the chain later on. I create a Rune Chant and I activate Chane, which means that once I do the Rune Chant and the Rosetta Swing with the Arcane, I will have dealt enough Arcane to keep my Creepers with 3 bind counters on it. So I go ahead and play this Riftbind, which is the only card there that I can play, because I haven't played a non-attack yet. So this is pops a Rune Chant and it's only coming for 3 physical. It doesn't get any buff, but I do need to start with an attack to be able to play the use the Creepers. And this does have go again from Chane's ability. Of course, another thing I'm thinking about this turn, aside from dealing 3 Arcane to my opponent, is also how I can clear at least 2 of my Blood Debt cards, so that at the end of this turn, I'll only go down to 14 if I leave just 1 Blood Debt in there, which means I get my Husk, is not going to pop. So, yep, go ahead and activate Creepers, flash out the Minnowism, gives me a second action point. And yeah, I make a mistake here. Instead of playing this Bounding Demigod here, I should have used my first action point to just swing Rosetta to guarantee that I get the Arcane in, because my opponent right now has no Arcane barrier. But yeah, that's just the the leftover habits from playing Viceroy, where your turn always ends with Rosetta. So clearly my opponent doesn't want to give me any cards in hand, and I know they have a Chalmont Heroic in their arsenal still. Yep, so I get to go ahead, so I go ahead and belittle, revealing the Vexing Malice, and I get to find up Minnowism. Basically, just trying to punish my opponent as much as I can for them choosing to keep all their cards in hand. And belittle, of course, just naturally as go again. And now I'm considering, just playing the Minnowism and then playing Vexing Malice to further punish my opponent, which, will still get me to the extra 2 Arcane I need to deal this turn to keep Creepers. But then I don't end with any arsenal, and that doesn't feel very good to me. So I just end up swinging the Rosetta. I get to arsenal another non-attack with go again, and go into next turn with a guaranteed blue in hand. Yep, there we go, to the Rosetta Swing. And since we did manage to clear 2 of our Blood Debts, we only take 1 and we go to 14. Yeah, so my opponent plays a Chalmont Heroic, which we were definitely expecting, but we still have Husk, so, that basically is just a free block. A free block on one of their attacks. Yep, so they start with an Entwined Lightning, and they didn't fuse it, so we can definitely expect Snapdragons being used here. But we're definitely still forced to use Husk on this. I was wondering whether I can be greedy and try and save it for a relevant on-hit if they follow up with that. But that's too greedy, because, they very well Like, they very well just could have followed up with a Rosetta swing, which means I'm forced to use Husk on like the 2 physical on Rosetta. So yeah, we kind of no choice but to use Husk on the Twine Lightning. We took 1, and they follow up with Nimblism and Snatch. Nimblism giving them the embodiment of Lightning, and the Snatch is now coming in for 10. So the only way we full block this is if we give them our entire hand plus Grasp. But that's terrible because we are at the point where we're going to be racking up blood debt if we don't clear it. So I really just need to let my opponent have this. Well, I have the draw effect. The question is now whether I'm going to block at all. The Snatch is coming in for 10, so if I don't block at all, then, you know, they draw up, and no matter what they draw, they can just pitch it to Rosetta. I'll take the 2 Arcane, and I can block the 2 physical with my equipment, but then I'll be at 1. And even with my full grip, me being at 1, it means I do need to kill my opponent next turn. Otherwise, my banished Karen has just killed me. So going to 1 feels a bit too risky. So I do it like that. I will give my opponent just 1 card. Yep, so I go ahead and block 3, take 7. I'm really hoping my opponent doesn't draw another 0-cost attack. So they draw into Sonata, so they could have just pitched this to swing Rosetta and do a 2-2. But from my opponent's side, I believe, yeah, where they are coming from is that they really need to sort of threaten a card from my hand, because with 5 shackles and 3 cards in hand, they don't think it's enough just to swing Rosetta and not guarantee a card from my hand. And they get punished for that. They Sonata here and they whiff on it, they don't get any attack. So instead of taking the guaranteed 4 damage, they tried and fished for a 0-cost attack, and they did not get it. Okay, so on our turn we banish and we get 2 hits again. Unfortunately, we don't have any Blood Debt in our hand to give the Shadow Versa a go again. So I start the turn by shackling. And then I go ahead and play the Belittle. And note that Belittle is not a Shadow Runeblade card, so, you know, it didn't get Go Again from Chane's effect. So my next Shadow Runeblade attack action card still gets Go Again from Chane's effect, which allows me to, you know, not break the chain. And I did not reveal to Belittle. I chose to pitch the Vexing Malice instead of the Captain's Call, because I figured I'd rather have Captain's Call around for extra action points. Okay, then I go ahead and flash out the Minnowism, giving me an extra action point. And this Bounding Demigod has Go Again from Chane's effect, so I still have 2 action points even after playing this. And we've used our Creepers for the 4th time now, which is, you know, it's actually just amazing. And because of that, there's actually no way we can keep it around after this turn, because I can most deal 3 arcane damage with a Rune Chant and a Rosetta Swing. But, you know, using it 4 times is definitely done way more than it typically does. So this Demigon's coming in for 7. My opponent blocks 5 of it. Chalmont Heroic is blocking 4 because of the embodiment. I take 2. And then I use my 1 floating and my 1 action point to Rosetta for 2 and 2. So my opponent takes the 2 arcane and uses the 2 remaining equipment to block the 2 physical. So, you know, that's very telling. It's telling me, you know, they definitely want to keep the 2 cards in hand. And since they still have Chalmont Heroic out, that can be very dangerous for me. So I do need to pressure at least 1 more card from my opponent. Yep, so I go ahead and break the chain here. Go ahead and pitch the Captain's Call to create a Rune Chant and then play the Unhallowed Rites. The other option was I just play the Shadow of Ursa for free and Arsenal the Captain's Call. But that wouldn't take, you know, 1 more card from my opponent's hand, which is just a read that I made that I need to do. And I'm, you know, looking at how this turned out, I'm definitely glad I did, because they had an E-Strike. So if I let them keep 2 cards, they could have just E-Strike me for 10 because of the Chalmont Heroic. Definitely glad about that. They go ahead and take the Rune Chant, and then I take 1 physical from the Unhallowed Rites, and they go to 1. We finally lose our creepers, but it did so much, and we take 2 blood dead. My opponent only has 1 card in hand, so yep. They go ahead and make a rune chant and just swing Rosetta, so that's a total of 3 damage. So I definitely take the rune chant. And now when I'm deciding whether to take the physical, I realize that if I do that, I actually just have a guaranteed win. Because if I go down to 1 and my opponent's also at 1, then, you know, that skull cap can never come back on. And so I just need to create a rune chant and swing Rosetta, and they'll be dead. Yep, so I go ahead and take the 2 physical, and I just tell my opponent I'm going to create a rune chant and swing Rosetta at them. And so we call it there. So yeah, we definitely made some mistakes and made some missequencing sequencing errors, but we did manage to get there in the end. Chane is just, you know, just really strong. I think if Viscerai gets enough, Chane would be the strongest Runeblade, and Chane is definitely favored into Viscerai already. So yep, gonna get some practice in with this deck. And yep, that's all I had for you guys today. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed it.